So, hi everyone. I'm here with Graham Norris today, and Graham's a futurist and a psychologist. Graham, we chatted before a few months ago, and sort of you gave us sort of like your really approach around thinking around the future and planning around the future. But how have things been going? I mean, they've been a sort of a lot of change that's kind of happened in the market. I mean, like change hasn't stopped. In fact, if anything, since we last spoke, it seems like it's got even more change than we've ever seen, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can see that a lot of areas of change have accelerated, if anything.
Yeah.
And I look at a lot of S curves. And so when we look back at the past, we can see S curves of developments in various technologies and what have you. And I think at the moment we're still on the steep curve of some of these S curves in the technological developments. However, I would also say that I see also a slowing down of acceleration in some areas. AI is top of mind for a lot of people, for example. And I think if you look at ChatGPT, it's not accelerating in terms of those improvements as quickly as before.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of a bubble that's sort of like it's been building and building and building, and it does feel like it's sort of slowing down. I mean, when we were first chatting, there's a lot of fear, and we were just chatting a little bit about fear and trust just then, just before we started here. And it felt like there's a lot of fear around AI. I mean, what's your sense when you're out talking to people? Do you think that's sort of like waning a little bit?
So my sense is, while the capabilities of the basic platforms around artificial intelligence are maybe leveling off a little bit, it's now people are applying it and trying to figure out, okay, how to get various technologies over the line. And so I'm looking a lot at that now because it seems there's a lot of hope around various employments of AI, but actually getting those things over the line so that they're useful is quite challenging. And I one of the things I've read recently that really resonated with me was talking about radiologists. And we've heard for a long time about how AI can actually do a better job at looking at scans and x-rays and what have you, and making diagnostic analyses of those. And yet radiologists are still coming out and being trained and being hired at the same rates as they were before. And there's a lot of reasons why AI hasn't actually taken over their jobs. And so I think, looking at, okay, which kinds of tasks are going to be automated in the near term future is one of the really tough things. People are still looking over their shoulders, but it's quite hard to get that technology over the line. I'd be curious about your experiences, though. What are you seeing in terms of fear, into and in the workplace?
I kind of feel that the fear around AI in particular seems to have sort of abated somewhat. So I mean, we were all talking about hallucinations and it sort of taking over the world and sort of like pictures of the Terminator up and those kind of things. And it feels like that sort of noise has sort of gone down as we got more used to it. I mean, you shop at Amazon and there's an AI there asking you. You can ask the AI about the product you want to buy, and it's sort of like almost like become normalized. And it just feels it's that change curve almost. Like it's kind of like we're going through that change curve, which is, first we're sort of in denial about it, and then we sort of get to the acceptance of it. But what strikes me is almost when you get to that acceptance level, that's when the real value comes in. It's almost like some of us just sort of like, well, the hype's gone, and so we just sort of give up on it. But actually, it's now's the place when we can actually sort of have sensible conversations around it, and this is when the real value comes in. So it does feel like it feels like it's changed. It feels like it's changed. Maybe it's not quite as exciting, and all of us who get excited about these things will move on to the next thing. But it's probably an area where we just got to sort of hold the course and be sort of, I suppose, pragmatic and steady in terms of just focusing on things that need to be done and using it for things to be done.
Are you seeing particular tasks or jobs where AI is actually being really quite effective and has shifted things, and other areas where it's still kind of falling short?
I think there's been a lot of, I mean, basically, I think we've all got excited around ChatGPT and the various sort of like, conversational models. I think where you actually see it being a lot of use is in things like data cleansing, text transcription. I'm talking about large language models here. I think things like video generation, you see that starting to pop up. I think in terms of like advertising, because there's a real cost benefit to doing this. So, transcription of telephone calls as an example, and using AI to then analyze that. You think about the advertising industry. It's like I want to have a red lighthouse rather than a white lighthouse in my particular aerial shot, and I could just redo that. I mean, it saves a fortune, right? So I think it's those cases where we almost don't notice to a certain extent are the cases where I think it's being used the most. Financial services is quite cautious, right? So it tends to be quite cautious in terms of adopting some of this stuff. So those are quite safe cases. going back to your radiology kind of example, one of the things that kind of worries me about AI is, you're looking at like scans of X-rays as an example, or tests, and yes, the AI can sort of determine particular test results as an example, and that's great. I think statistically, it's definitely positive, right? So statistically, you can show that. I think the psychology element of it is what happens if you have a radiologist that is just so used to seeing 99% of the time it's correct. What happens with the 1%, whether there's a false positive in the model, and yet the radiologist is signing off saying, yes, this is definitely what it is. Are they getting lulled into a false sense of security? And how do we protect against that false sense of security? We're accepting of a human making mistakes. We also need to just psychologically be careful of the fact that the computer might make a mistake as well. And I think we've got a bit way to go that psychologically as humans around that. I don't know what you think of that.
No, I think it's a very important point. Is at the moment we're still trying to find out where to draw the line between what the computer is going to be doing and what we're supposed to be doing. And you're absolutely right. I've seen some studies around doctors using AI, and even the radiologists. When there was AI involved, they were very quick to defer to the AI when making those kinds of diagnoses. And for doctors as well, they've shown when they were using AI, they've become sort of cognitively quite lazy. And there's various other studies that show people using AI in kind of the wrong ways. They just stop thinking, and the critical thinking is suspended, and they just kind of let the AI do whatever it wants.
How do you think we protect against that, though? Because it's going to be a problem, I think, because statistically, I mean, the diagnosis is on a group level is probably going to be better as a result of this, right? So statistically, it's sort of like, well, they're probably making the right decisions, but on an individual level, we need to guard against that and sort of stay fresh against it. I mean, I do think it's something I think we're going to come up with, because we do want to have that human involvement, and certainly got the human accountability. I think that we still want to have that there.
I think assigning the roles is going to be important. What is the AI going to be doing, and what is the role of the human in checking that? And still having the criteria as if because humans will work with other humans and check each other's work, and it should be the same way when you're using artificial intelligence. And I think just going through the processes and making sure people are still following the rules and having the critical judgment is going to be the important part.
Do you think our relationship with computers is going to change? I don't know. That's kind of an interesting kind of question. And so they're now talking about these robots, aren't they? They're talking about these robots. I mean, they've been sort of walking those out on stage to varying degrees of success. I mean, but some of them these days are just like, they're amazing, right? And it's like, they look like humans as well, and you relate to things. It's very hard not to anthropomorphize them. And the same with large language models as well. Do you think our relationship's going to change? Because again, we're much more forgiving of humans than we are of computers.
Yeah, and it's already changing. I mean, you can see now people are building relationships with artificial intelligence and having sort of, telling them all their sort of secrets and fears and hopes and aspirations. And so, absolutely, I think it's already changing, and it will continue to evolve. And I think that's always been the case. I think it's right to be maybe suspicious of how some of those developments will pan out, because I think even with social media, it has some benefits, but also some bad points as well, and we can see some of those playing out now with artificial intelligence.
I mean, and I suppose one of the things that struck me last time we talked is like how we then think about the future, and sort of like having a framework to do that. And I say we're like with humans. I mean, it just feels like human beings we're quite messy. I mean, it's not just my room that's messy. It's like, I mean, just messy in terms of our psychology and society. And we sort of like, sometimes it feels like we want it to be very sort of processed, but we kind of bundle through in this sort of like messy kind of way to get to the right answer over a large number of people. How do we think about that in terms of like how that interacts with computers, and I suppose these large language models are sort of like replicating some of that?
Well, a few things jumped into my head, but the one that I can remember is that I think when we're looking at the roles of computers and humans and how that interaction is going to evolve, which it will over the coming years and decades, that it's important that we don't get too hung up on the computers, because if everybody's using the same AI, right, then you end up with companies making the same kinds of decisions. And the more you automate those decisions, the more you'll have a sort of homogenous industries, everything becomes commoditized. And so then how are you going to get the competitive advantage? Is still going to be through the human creativity. Because I don't know if you've noticed this, Chris, when you're using ChatGPT, for example, it will always kind of drag you back to a kind of safe, a safe medium result, right? It's you'll be like trying to come up with something, a little bit different. It'll be like, well, yeah, okay, and then it will kind of gradually and very surreptitiously steer you back to something, towards the mean. And you can quite imagine that happening in anything where the decision making is automated.
Yeah, well, one of the things that kind of fascinates me, at least on my AI journey, is I keep seeing correlations between the way I interact with AI and what that teaches me about the way I interact with humans. I mean, so I know there's a lot of talk around when will AI catch up with humans, but actually the way they're kind of built in some ways is based around, some of the way the brain's kind of built in terms of predictive mechanisms sitting in our mind as well. How much do you think we can learn about human psychology from AI?
I haven't thought about that too much, but I'll just share a little experience I had with you. I had yesterday was that I asked, I can't remember which one it was now. I think it was Perplexity, a question, and it gave me an answer, and it was a plausible kind of answer. But I thought through it. I was like, well, that wasn't really the question I was asking, and I actually just replied that. I said, oh, that's not the question I was asking, and it kind of acknowledged that it had answered a different question. Yeah. You could have read my question in the way that it answered it, but it kind of knew that it was trying to palm me off with a simple, obvious, easy answer. And when I called it out, when I called it out, and all I said was that wasn't my question. It was like, okay, fair enough. And then it gave me the answer to what my real intention was for my original question. I thought that was quite fascinating. I've had a previous experience. This was quite a while ago, where, in ChatGPT you could integrate other sort of GPTs or something or other and it was password protected or whatever. And I'd put in my password for this other thing, and I don't know what the connectivity was. And it was telling me, oh no, you need to put in your password. And I'd had a glass of wine. So I said, I've already put in my password, and I was getting quite, forceful with it. And eventually it said, okay, no problem. And then it just carried on. Yeah. Now, I've never been involved in a computer interaction where it was asking for a password and I could just convince it that I'd done it, like I was talking my way into a nightclub past the bouncer, and you can do that. Very fascinating. But so those interactions you have with it can seem quite human.
I don't know. I mean, because relationships is one of the biggest use, I think, of large language models. I mean, I think that's the research you're talking to, and you just wonder if it's going to evolve to that, because they do tend to be. And that was a big change, wasn't it? It went from, I think, 4 to 5, and the actual model changed, so people weren't getting the same response from the person that they were, or the model they were talking to, under the new model.
Yeah, for me, and it's a bit of a philosophical conversation, but the interface that we use at the moment to get things done is a very kind of human type one, right? And the response we get is a very human type response. Now, and it's easy to get lulled into that kind of feeling that you're having a kind of human interaction with something, which we don't need, right? It doesn't. That's a design choice that it does it like that, and all its interactions, the way it responds to you, is all a choice. Because and then if we sort of then look at, okay, some of the most practical applications of AI are actually quite narrow. So you don't have to worry so much about the hallucinations. It's got a very narrow data set. It's got a very sort of rigorous set of instructions about how to handle the data. And then it's the most useful way of using it. Now, when we use it in these more nebulous kinds of ways, then we can start to feel it's like a little bit kind of human. But I think there's a lot of risks in that. I also, once again, another philosophical kind of question is talking about artificial general intelligence, where it's sort of, it's acting like more intelligent than a human. But what does that even mean? Some of these things are like interesting concepts, but from a practical point of view, this sort of anthropomorphication of artificial intelligence has a lot of drawbacks, and we don't necessarily need to go down that route.
Well, there's quite an interesting sort of field of study which is saying, well, look, the way we think is linked to the way our language is. So the way we actually describe things. So you look at different societies, they use slightly different languages, slightly different structures, and that relates to slightly different ways of thinking or relating to the world as well. And you're making me think of that, going back to the AI, humans as AI, AI as humans kind of conversation, which is, if we think in a certain way and we train it to think a certain way, we're going to come up with the same answers. If it thinks in a different way, or if we have these different ways of interacting, or if the AI has different ways of interacting, will it come out with different ways of thinking, for example, around things like medical research or, science research or those kind of things, because we sort of get it out of the paradigm, the way we've evolved, to something else, really. I don't know. That'd be kind of interesting to see if there's other ways of thinking that could actually yield different answers that we might actually not comprehend.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a very useful way of thinking about it. I mean, if you showed up and were trying to interact with these things, and every day it was like, okay, today I'm going to be like this, or I'm going to be like that, and then just give you a very diverse range of possibilities about the perspective it was going to take, that could be a lot more useful than it having what we have now, which is kind of a generic large language model, which drags you back to something quite safe. Yeah, I mean, what? Well, so how would you imagine that sort of panning out? I mean, imagine the future. What would we be doing?
Well, there's an interesting YouTube video I watched, and it was the linguist guy, and he kind of went viral, and he started talking in machine code, I think it was, or machine language, or hexadecimal, and obviously you could understand it because it just translated it, and it sort of worked it out because it's got a memory of everything. And there was another one which I'm not sure was true or not, where they started talking some made-up language or whatever it was, and you just wonder, like, we're almost like artificially constraining it to be something that we understand, and is that almost like training wheels? Is that training wheels to protect us and to make us feel comfortable, or is it training wheels that sort of constrains it in terms of being able to find its real use as well? And you just wonder how it's going to evolve in the future. And I'm talking about sort of general models rather than specific models that are trained on very, very kind of specific things. So I don't know if we're sort of constraining it. Are we artificially constraining it? And is that the right thing to do?
I think we're probably heading towards a healthier place, because when we compare AI to human, we're always trying, all this talk about trying to make artificial intelligence like human intelligence. And I just don't see the point, because you can have great, useful artificial intelligence doing all kinds of range of tasks for us, and it doesn't need to be like a human to do that. A calculator isn't awesome because it operates like a human. It's awesome because it operates like a computer, and it can calculate all kinds of things that a human can't. And so we can have artificial intelligence doing stuff way beyond our capacity, and we already do. And that's super useful to us. We don't need it to comprehensively think in a general way like a human. I know there's probably benefits for that you can then apply it to all kinds of different tasks, but in the medium term, I would say getting it to do the narrow tasks is more than enough of a challenge as well. I mean, you see driverless cars, okay, getting that over the line is already quite a challenge. But maybe I'm too humble in my my expectations. Maybe artificial general intelligence is the way forward.
I mean, and I think my concern is that you sort of see the hype cycle sort of building, and then it doesn't quite meet expectation. And then there's research out there saying that something like only 20% ever find it useful, or projects ever get to completion. I think it was, and almost like people lose heart and they say, well, I'm just going to put that on one side, and you sort of like put it to one side, but then you ignore it because you're busy, you've got other stuff going on. But actually that's when the opportunity really is, and it's important just to keep going. And I use an example of that as being the .com kind of boom. I mean, we're all the same kind of like hype cycle, really, I suppose, which was we thought everything was going to be done digitally. I mean, we had video calls that were happening. We were watching movies over the internet. We were, doing our shopping over the internet. And it was amazing. We could do all of these things. And then the .com bubble burst, and we didn't do any of it. And we didn't do it. But then we've got Amazon, we've got Netflix, we've got, we're doing video calls now. Look where we are, sort of like 10, 20 years later. Yep. It's all come to reality. It just didn't happen at the height of the bubble. It definitely happened. And actually, if you invested before the bubble and started building these things, you probably caught cold. But if you started doing it when the hype had gone out, that's when there was the opportunity to really make a massive difference for folks.
Yeah,
it kind of fit. That's the example I use, and it just feels like we're maybe in a similar kind of cycle at the moment, really.
Yeah. We've kind of got to do all those experiments and burn through all that
Yeah,
money to actually find out what works and create
yeah,
the
yeah.
infrastructure. Yeah. No, that makes a lot
Uh,
of sense.
Meanwhile, businesses are still people businesses, and so we've got to look after our people. I mean, it becomes another tool to do business, doesn't it? And we've got to, we're still fearful and nervous about the future, what actually happens, and make sure we can sort of understand that. I mean, there's all this geopolitical risks going on as well. I mean, that hasn't gone away. I mean, that was probably right at the start of when we started chatting as well. I mean, it just feels like there's just more uncertainty around, not less.
Well, I was going to ask you. I mean, outside of artificial intelligence, what else do you see going on in the in the people space? Regardless of the technology, how do you see people are feeling?
I think people are just feeling uncertain about things. I mean, you look across, obviously, I'm based in the UK, and there's certainly, if you just look at the UK, it feels like everyone's uncertain. There's a lot of sort of turmoil that's kind of going on, but actually, one of the things I use AI for is actually looking at what's going on in different markets around the world, particularly in local language, which we can't all speak every language, and you actually find there's a very similar kind of themes of uncertainty going on in most places, and I think that's be it driven by the pandemic or whatever it is, it feels like we're all quite anxious around turmoil that's kind of going on at a society level, but almost like at a global level, and I think that sort of driving behaviors. And I'm not quite sure what's driven it, be it social media, be it the pandemic, be it, shortage of resources or those kind of things. But it does feel like there's sort of that collective anxiety we've got kind of going on around where we sit on the future. It's almost like it's the promises of certain accepted norms have sort of been shattered, and now we're sort of like saying, well, what do we now need to do? What do we need to do? And I think collectively, we're having difficulty sort of accepting that or dealing with that, I think, to a certain extent.
And how do you see that? What are the symptoms of that? How do you see that sort of manifesting itself?
I think uncertainty in decision making, fearfulness, a certain amount of unrest, hesitation in decision making. I do think that's certainly from a technology investment point of view, that's sort of calmed down a little bit. So I think more people are investing more recently, but definitely we've seen that there's been like an uncertain environment that you get into this sort of like a little bit of wait and see before I now invest. I think technology wise and data wise and AI has been a driver for this. Is sort of like there's been more certainty around that, but it's still going on in the background because that generates more uncertainty around jobs, uncertainty around the future of careers. I mean, that kind of stuff is changing and changing very fast, which I think as humans it's quite hard for us to deal with, because we've evolved to have change on a sort of like a daily scale, with the sun going round and sort of like the earth going around the sun, rather than sort of like on a 10-minute scale. I mean, the 15 minutes meetings I struggled with because they were just too short, right? I don't know.
Interesting.
Is that common though? Is that just my psychology?
Well, you mean sort of looking for sort of comfort structure?
Comfort structure, but also there's a level of anxiety, I suppose. And we definitely chatted about this last time around sort of anxiety around sort of like what does the future hold, and I suppose just like how do we deal with that? And it feels like there's more change than there was historically.
So I spoke with an aerospace company a little while ago, and with their HR team, and they've been quite insulated from some of the AI tools because they got a lot of compliance sort of restrictions on those. But they knew it was coming. It was coming. And so what I said to them was, well, we need to get perspective, because we need to make long-term decisions, and we're used to making short-term decisions based on short-term information. So the first thing we need to do is look further back than we normally do, because it's easy to get caught up in the headlines. Whereas we need to look at the long-term trends and all those cycles of change to be able to understand what kind of cycles of change we're in at the moment and that we will be in the future. And when you take a longer term perspective, I think you can have more confidence that we're not going to, at the beginning of my talks, I gave all these headlines about how AI is going to cure cancer and fix global hunger and energy and everything else, but it also might kill us and, make us stupid. And of course, we can get lost in those short-term headlines because that's what we're conditioned to do. But we really need to take a long-term view, and that can give us more confidence in what we're doing and help us to form an opinion about the future.
Yeah, and I suppose because looking to the future is also a bit about either fear or a desire around opportunity for the future as well. I mean, so that's obviously, part of the things that you would do or get brought in to do. I mean, is AI the key topic that people are really looking at? I mean, has that been like a catalyst, or are there other things that are out there that are also sort of bubbling underneath the surface that or people are also worried or are looking at in the future?
I would
Is it just
say
AI?
that AI is sort of the general one, and also the geopolitics, and then it's specific to the industry or the function or the sector or whatever it is. Everyone's got their own things going on, but definitely artificial intelligence and to a certain extent the geopolitical situation is always kind of looming as
Yeah.
the sort of meta crises of the moment.
Yeah, and I suppose how do we personally deal with that? I suppose we've got to take stock a little bit. I mean, that's why I found particularly instructive last time was just around sort of like having that wider picture and then sort of having a model around, well, almost like a probability kind of basis around what do we think might happen and how do we prepare for it and sort of thinking about that. I thought that was very useful, I must admit.
And one of the things I've been thinking about more recently is the importance about having opinions. Because if you have opinions about what you want from the future, then it kind of forces you to, keep up to date and to, look further back and to be able to keep reviewing and have some sort of basis and foundation for those opinions and keep updating that. Because if we don't have opinions, then we don't have that much direction. It's easy to feel out of control and getting knocked around by whatever's happening at the moment. So although opinions can sound a bit of a double-edged sword, I think it's important to have a view of the future, what could happen, and what you want to make of it.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go to my Star Trek example, which I probably shouldn't do in a podcast because it makes it look like I'm a big fan, which I did quite like it when it was on. But if you look at that in terms of some of the technology that they showcased there, I mean, it was like in the 60s, right? And how that come through. It's almost like there's talking about it, having an opinion on what the future looks like, and yeah, it's probably actually come to pass, even though that they were just like plastic or bits of wood, right? I mean, but it's actually come through. It's really quite fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's funny you mention that. It's like having the communication devices are really just mobile phones, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm optimistic about the future, I have to say, in terms of like taking around the AI. I sort of see it as we're going to absorb it into our lives, and I say it's a bit like the invention of the motor car. It's kind of like there are all these tasks that we were doing before. It's not like we carried on walking places when we had the motor car. We just found new ways of using it, right? So it becomes a helper for us to be able to do it. And I think we just got to realize that society is based on humans, and so I think it'll just become a helper for us to be able to do things, be it medical diagnosis, it'll just take some of the stuff away, but there's always going to be a need for that human to human interaction because that's what society is, right? So I'm relatively optimistic around the whole thing. So I'm not fearful of it, but it's interesting just watching how it's going to evolve, I think. So
Absolutely. And I think from a futurist point of view, you look at trends and then counter trends and, how all that plays out. And of course, the transitions as well. Some people get burned a little bit when there's a trend and then a counter trend. People don't adapt quickly enough. But absolutely, I'm also optimistic. And the more time you spend thinking about the future, the more optimistic you can be because you thought through even the bad things that might happen.
Yeah. Well, Graham, thanks very much for another chat. So I appreciate it, and thanks for asking me the questions as well. So I enjoy that too. So,
not at all. No, I like to hear your perspective on things. So it works well.
So we'll just both of us just keep watching the future and seeing how it evolves. Really, I suppose is sort of the things, and don't be fearful of it. I suppose is probably the other message.
Lean into it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Chris.